Okay, yeah. And then so there's plenty more news, right, concerning kind of Iran and the region.
Yeah, this is a bit less to do with Iran, but there was a, but this is a typical type of thing that we like to cover here. But there was an attack on an Israeli cargo vessel ship in the Sea of Oman, which today, interestingly, I found that it's also referred to as Gulf of Oman. I always thought it's a sea, but anyway, it was attacked. There was an explosion. First, it was described as a mysterious explosion, and there hasn't been any further concrete evidence or explanations coming out. But as soon as it happened, Benny Gantz, the candidate in the Israeli elections and a former ally of Netanyahu and a former, even before that, a former uh, arch nemesis of Netanyahu, the leader of the Blue and White Coalition Party Alliance or whatever it's called. He said that he was the Minister of Defense. He is the Minister of Defense. He said that Iran is a suspect and in that explosion. And then less than a day later, Netanyahu came out and said that we think Iran is definitely behind this explosion. Iranian officials obviously uh, claim that it's this has nothing to do with them. Strongly rejected the accusations and said that this is the typical game that Israel plays to ramp up tensions against Iran and make Iran the bad guy in the region. Personally, I find it difficult to believe that Iran would do that because I don't know. It's possible that Iranian. The thing is, unlike what they like to claim in a lot of mainstream media, Iran does not have a full control on its militia, on the militia forces like Yemeni forces or Hezbollah that it supports. They are largely independent, especially in internal matters, and some of them, the more extreme ones, may act on their own. So it's possible that a group connected to Iran somehow may have had something to do with this. But the idea that Iranian regime or Iranian government was involved in this, I find it highly unlikely because it was a cargo vessel, it was an explosion of not much significance. I have my theory is that that's more to do with Israeli elections because in the Israeli elections, Netanyahu is uh, the real threat to Netanyahu's prime ministerial ambitions, sorry, are the extreme right-wing parties led by people like Naftali Bennett and Gideon Sar. And even though they've been going down in polls, I think Netanyahu is trying to, I mean, obviously he's trying to put the international pressure on Iran as well. But I think this blaming Iran this quickly without any investigation, without any evidence, points to the fact that they are trying to top each other in the Israeli election in terms of who's tougher, who's more about Israeli security and such and such.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's really hard to believe anything that the Israelis would be saying about
about
this. You know, I
Iran,
mean,
yeah.
about Iran. I mean, the Israeli government lies nonstop, so it's really hard. But I just want to also pick up on another thing that you said about Iran not having control over all the militias in Iraq and all this, which makes complete complete sense to me. But this whole Gulf of Oman and this ship, I guess Iran, I'm looking at the map right now. I guess Iran would technically, like from Iranian territory, have access to where
Oh
this
yeah,
ship
yeah.
was from the
Oh yeah.
south, right? From the southeast,
Sure,
technically.
sure.
Yeah.
And to be honest, Yemenis probably do as
Yeah.
well. But no, my point was, for
Yeah, no,
example,
no, your point, yeah, I understood it
at,
wasn't with that. I was just.
at least in my view, for example, European countries in terms of foreign policy, at least during the last decade, it's been pretty much proven clearly that they are followers of the US when it comes to big things. These independent militia groups or groups that are trying to become a state or become political parties like Hezbollah.
Independent militia groups outside of Iran, you're referring to. So
Yes, yes, like
Iraq,
Yemen.
Syria, and
Yeah, yeah.
Yemen,
We
for
don't
instance.
have any
Yeah, yeah,
militia
of
groups
course.
in Iran.
Yeah.
Yeah, organized armed forces. But like Yemeni Houthis, all these groups,
Hmm.
their relationship with Iran is much like the relationship of Europe with the US. You know, yes, there is support. Yes, there is communication. Yes, there is even on a strategic stuff. They have to follow certain rules or certain directions from Tehran. but it's not like they're micromanaged,
Yeah.
and it's not like we are talking about a war situation, that especially guerrilla warfare, where there are these small cells independent of each other, where they can act independently. So I find it hard to believe that
No, I
it
mean that's
was.
very,
Uh,
and it's
yeah.
actually interesting. I was watching the analysis news the other day, and they had someone on Yemen, a Yemen advocate, and she was, and actually this is the Yemen part where the Houthis are much bigger than small militias. But she was just saying that Saudi is backed by the U.S. and the Houthis are backed by the Iran. This is not fair to put them on the same level. Yes, the Houthis might be support, they might affiliate with the Iranians, they're on the same side, you can say,
And
but in terms of material support that the Saudis get from the US, is you can't even compare it in any way
and
to
to
any
be,
kind of support or a little bit of intelligence that the
I
Houthis
mean,
could get from Iran.
yeah, exactly. It's not comparable. US has the largest military force in the world. They have the best military equipment in the world. And let's, I think it's important to note that the evidence of Iran's material support for Houthis is very limited. Most of the evidence suggests that Iran gave them know-how and
Hmm.
perhaps has given them some raw materials to do shit. But it's not, by the way, because perhaps Iran wants to give them more material support, but because Yemen is pretty much sort of under siege because of the way it is. And there was a thing, I think we reported on it, if I'm not mistaken, that there was for example, Iranian airplane, at least supposedly for humanitarian, there were humanitarian goods on the airplane. I'm sure there may have been arms in it for smuggling as well. But for example, I think Saudis said that they're gonna bomb that plane if it lands, and it didn't land. So just the level of support that Iran can give to Yemen is very limited. Let's
Yeah,
put aside how much it wants to give it support it can
no,
give
exactly.
to.
And
And
I
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and I was gonna say, and I recall clearly 3 to 4 years ago they were trying really hard to find evidence of Iran sending guns and weapons to the Houthis, and they found, like, there was this one boat here with some weapons or stuff. I mean, I don't think you need to smuggle machine guns into Yemen that bad. I'm sure.
Well, the real worry is
It,
missiles, and
yeah,
yeah, and to be honest, Iran seems to be more in like they this is the same thing they did with Hezbollah. They sell the technology, they don't sell the equipment itself. So that seems to be the case with the same with the Houthis. But and the I like Yemen. It's kind of like this is my view about it's kind of like Cuba of Iran. Because Cuba, in again my view of history, was not something that Soviet Union wanted to get involved to, but because Fidel Castro came up and suddenly he saw that Americans aren't backing him, so he started espousing socialism. So he keeps his independence. So he sort of, they had to basically go for that.
mm-hmm.
Yemen sort of seems sort of similar situation for Iran in terms that they didn't really want it to get involved. It became crazy and it became it's the civil war and all that, and then Houthis, they asked for support, and there are some strategic, things to be gained there. Having a war near Saudis, the what do you call it? The waterway there. I forget the name. It has a very beautiful Arabic name, Mandala. I forget. Anyway,
On the
so there
left
are
of Yemen.
yes, yes, on
Yeah,
the left to the west of Yemen.
yeah,
So I do think Iran was sort of dragged into this more than I'm sure there were people within the regime that wanted this, but I think as a whole, the reason they went to it was more because it has started rather than they were the ones who started. But interestingly,
definitely.
but I mean, Biden's inactions and, to be honest, counterproductive actions hasn't gone unnoticed. Trita Parsi, who is one of the perhaps the biggest expert on Iranian-U.S. foreign relations in modern times, he excuse me, he wrote a great article in The Guardian, which I suggest everybody take a look at. And he wrote, I think, articles for other places as well. And he did an interview on The Hill that's worth checking out too. And he pointed out that sadly, it seems Biden is following more of Trump's policy towards Iran. And even though he did say in a speech that diplomacy is back, so is bombings. And he correctly pointed out that it took Trump 4 months in his presidency to bomb Syria. That happened with Biden in less than a month, or about a month. So, things are not looking good, and people are noticing it. So people, I mean experts. I'm no expert, but at least the ones I've been reading, I would say that there has been a lot of attacks on Biden in the mainstream media, and that he's losing the leverage that Trump created. Trump himself in a speech referred to that I had created this leverage, and Biden is basically destroying it. So I think Biden is trying to basically play that centrist game as always. But as Trita, Parsi, and others have pointed out, I think that may lead to a far worse situation, in far worse and far more deteriorated relationship between US and Iran.